Hello. I am in some stop and go traffic on the way back home. Um, and I was listening to The Wise Man's Fear, and something occurred to me. Like every now and again, like if I go away and I come back, months later and I listen again, I get to listen not necessarily newly, but more new. Like, excuse me. The longer I spend thinking about this, the longer I spend mulling over things, the more of a rut I get into as far as like where my brain wants to take me. Right? I have certain ideas that I want to be true, and I can't see outside of that. After a while. So it's been a minute. It's been a while since I've listened to these books, since I've been active. But today something occurred to me. Like I was thinking about that very thing, like that, that mental rut that you get into, and I was trying to think, okay, how do I break out of that? How do I see something newly? How do I see something differently? And the thought came to me to listen through from the perspective, like to think through each of these in any given piece of the book from the perspective of a given character, right? Important characters that I know, that are somewhat well known, but maybe their motivations are a bit of a mystery to me. I think in particular like of Ambrose, right? So if I read the books with Ambrose as my main subject of what I'm really thinking about, it's not much of the book that actually deals with him directly, but I'm hoping that putting his deeds in succession, like reading everything he does in order and without all the stuff in between, to kind of give myself a better idea of what is his motivation, what that kind of thing. Like that's what I was thinking. So I'm thinking there's like motivations that are going on here that are a mystery to me. And what was the thing? Like there was something that occurred to me. So I was listening to the part. In fact, where I picked up was just the last place that I had listened to in The Wise Man's Fear. It's where Quoth is on the road to Levenshire after he kills the fake Rue troop. Right? He's back. He's taking the girls back. And I was thinking about. There were things that other people had posted that really occurred to me that sort of, had me think along these lines. In particular, I think of the whole story as, it's allegorical, right? So alleg, short for allegory. This is in some sense, this story is a smaller version of the larger story, right? In some way. And I was thinking about that. I'm trying to like draw parallels between the different characters in that story and the other folks that we know. And it occurred to me that once he gets back to Levenshire, this is not necessarily part of that original. Actually, was it? I don't know. He goes back, and it just occurs to me to think of like Gran. Like who else? If this is allegorical, who is Gran? Right? Who does she represent in the rest of the story, right? I was also thinking about there's one of the most talented theorists that I've run into, that I cannot remember his name or her name. Could have been a girl. I don't know. I don't judge. So this person, I can't remember their name, but one of the more insightful posters on Reddit wrote a thing about how we interpret the use of words in the stories that Scarpy tells, right? So Scarpy, in the first book, Scarpy tells a couple stories about Lanray and then about the angels. What was it? Lanray turned, and then Telu's Watchful Eye, I think, was the name of the next one. so he tells these stories, and then there was the one where Aleph is there and he transforms Telu and the rest into those angel type beings, right? That if we look at the conversation that Selatos has with Aleph, he says, I'm sorry, I cannot, my heart tells me something about like he's got to stop Haliax and those who follow him, and so what he's going to do is we will confound the plots of Lanre and those who follow him. That's what it was. He says we will confound the plots, which if you take the words confound and plot and you interpret them as you're sort of intended to interpret them, he's going to try and stop Haliax from doing whatever he's trying to do. And I'm sure that that's true in some sense, but the words that he chooses are confound and plot. So if you say confound, a synonym for confound would be to confuse, and a plot can be like a scheme or it can be a story. So what he's saying could be interpreted as him vowing to go confuse the story of Lanre and those who follow him. That if that's the intended communication of Selatos at the time or not, it's something that tells us about the story. Like it's sort of meta information about the story. So what we're going to get is Haliax and those who follow him are, I suggest that this means that they're going to be made out to be the bad guys, right? This is their story has been confused, right? That over time, and in fact, Quoth even talks about when he's in the archives, he says, he's trying to figure out who would be, pruning the information from the archives and from the libraries, that over the course of such time as to, hide this information or he's confusing the information about, there was that one book, Lights, Feltemi's Lights, where the two different versions of the book said two different things. Like, who's doing that? He knows that it must be the Emir, right? Who would have a reason to do that besides the Emir? And that is like those two things fit, right? So here they are, they're editing this story to make people think what they want them to think. And they're vilifying who are their enemies, right? I think that's sort of part of the lesson in this, is that, they're like, a lot of this is about propaganda. We've been told the same thing for so long that we believe it. It's an incredibly important lesson, right? And I think that that's sort of the intention, right? The story is not what it seems to be at first. We already know that, I think. But the whole point about him confusing the plots...
Miles, use the right 2 lanes to take exit 24 for I-83 north toward York Pa Optimonium.
Okay, so... where are plots being confused? Right? What work could we say is the work of the Emir, like the ones who are out to confound the plots of Lanre and those who follow him, right? And I'm asking this, like, sort of step back from that particular perspective, right? So in some sense, we already have an idea of what the Emir are doing to confound the plots of Lanre. In pruning the libraries, that's happening, but that is not a limited, like, there may be other cases of that, right? Why are they going to stop there? There are things going on where if people have a misinterpretation, that's what I want to know about. Where are there misinterpretations that we could potentially trace back to that kind of scheme, right? Pardon me a moment. And it's been a while since I revisited that question. I don't even know if I've asked that question in quite that way, because I'm gonna have to go back and read the books again to kind of get where, like, what is the information that they're looking for, that specifically that Quoth knows is being done by the Emir.
Quarter mile. Use the right 2 lanes to take exit 24 for I-83 north toward York Pa Timonium.
And the things that stand out to me are
Right 2 lanes to take exit 24.
The story of
Continue for 42 miles.
that Ben tells him about the time where they would kill people who had knacks, right? And that seems correct to me, right? There's a vilification of anybody who can do magic, right? And that would make sense to me for reasons I'll get into in a little bit. So anybody who can do magic is bad, is evil somehow. We also, since the Talon Church, I want to say since the point at which they were taken over, because that's another thing. It's like the way I think about it, that, you know, at some point they existed in one form, and then at the time of the Emperor that they called Emperor Nalto, at the time of Emperor Nalto, that was where, like, they disbanded the Emir, right? And it was to me, it strikes, it makes me believe that somehow someone else had taken over, someone new had taken over control of the church, right? Or, you know, they had changed their purpose somehow, like in some really deep fundamental way, right? You know, for the better, for the worse, whatever the case is, they're behaving differently. Okay, so at that point, from that point forward, what happened? Like, that was the point at which, you know, the Emir were vilified. They were run off, right? And this was also, I suggest, the point at which the Adimaru, in their current form, came into existence, right? So at that point, see, that's the thing. I'm sort of, it's not necessary to get where I'm going with this ultimately, to believe this as I do, but my belief is that when the Emir were disbanded, there were multiple factions of Emir, right? They weren't just a single, you know, the traveling judges that we've heard about, right? The Emir were known for that. Then you had the Siridae, you had, you know, there was the, you know, where the story of that Trappist tells about sort of the founding of the church, had Telu going from town to town and appointing people as priests. And I believe, for other reasons, like, there's so many things like piled on top of each other, that he was picking out the Emir, right? He knew who they were, and he was having them be in charge. He was giving them the responsibility of taking care of people. There's something else there too. I got to figure that out. In any case, so among the Emir that were in hiding, he picked some of them to be priests. That doesn't, like, was that all of them? There were emir in hiding, right? We know about that as well. So those emir who were in hiding, they weren't run off, but the ones who were, the ones that we knew about, the ones who were ultimately vilified by the church for whatever their reasoning, I believe ended up finding like they lost their way. They forgot, why they were driven off from their rightful place, and there they are now, the Adem, right? The Adem are what became of the emir. Now, it's also my belief, making that assumption, that at the time where they were run off, they had musicians, right? They were the Adem musicians, very uncommon, but they existed. They would have been, many of them, en route between cities, going places to do what they do. And if the emir were run off, then what became of them, right? So their musicians arrive where they were supposed to go and find nobody's there. How do they meet up with the rest of their family, right? How do they find them? The rest of the emir? Well, they don't know. They're just going to keep traveling and looking. And how are they going to make their way? They're going to make their way doing what they know how to do, which is playing music. I believe that is the origin of the Ademaru, right? That's where they came from. So in a very significant sense, like if we actually trace this back, like I have so many more things to say about this, if we actually trace this back, it would be true as it can be, equally true, that, when the first campfire stories were told, that Ademaru were there. Like there's some way in which that's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the Ademaru are the same, they're the only descendants of those first Ademaru, or that they're the only incarnation of them, whatever the case is, right? So hold on a moment. So, confounding the plots. That's what we're going for, okay, right? So this is the general landscape that I'm working with. Whether you believe all the rest of that or not is unnecessary for this particular part of it. The motivation. What was their motivation? Hold on a minute. Okay, so we had to look at it from a different perspective. I was thinking about confounding the plots and confuse the stories. So that story was confused. So the story about the Ademaru, the story of where the Adem came from, like all these things that would have been actively pursued, right? Why is that? Why is that? Now the thing that really gets me, the thing that where this all comes from, because this all is an extension of the original story, right? This is, something's being played out here that started 5,000 years ago or more, right? At the end of the Great War, these characters, you had Celatos, you had Lanre, all those who surrounded them. There was something started then that is playing itself out now, right? Where we're on the hunt for the Chandrian. Who are the Chandrian? Now, this is why I think where the stories got confused, this is what really I think I am coming down for sure on the side of Kvothe is one of the Chandrian. Because I think we don't know what the Chandrian are. We've been told what somebody wants us to believe the Chandrian are, right? We've been told that they're evil. We've been told that they're, they just strike like lightning out of the blue. No one knows why they're doing what they do. What is their purpose? right? And who was, like, what is the purpose of the Chandrian? And how do we know that, right? So the Chandrian was started by Lanray. Lanray, in the story that we know of him, is, or of what originally happened, what we know of, mostly comes from Scarpi's story, right? So Scarpi tells the story of Lanray. Lanray is trying, like, he goes up to Celitos and says, I hope you would join me for what what I'm trying to do. He says, destroy the world. That's what he's trying to do, right? And the thing that makes that, like, more, like, makes sense and make him not the villain, really, is that's why it ties back to Gran, right? Because it was that scene where Celitos and Lanray are there talking, and he says, why, I hope you would join me in what I would do. He's got there are reasons why he believes it might happen, right? If he could convince Celitos that it needs to be done, he might join him if he sees the necessity of it. And that's the thing. That's where that conversation was so reminiscent of Voth's conversation with Gran, right? He's like, some people have, most people aren't capable of doing the things that I do. And she's like, it's something that has to be done, right? There's no sense in dallying about or delaying. It's just, it has to be done. It's not pretty. No one ever thanks you for it, but it has to be done. And those two conversations were so reminiscent of each other. It's one of those things I can't, like, you'll have to go back and read them yourself to really appreciate it, because I can't recite them anymore. It's been a long enough time since I heard that the Scarpi story. I can't tell you off the top of my head, but those two stories, like the point of that, were so close. And so that's the thing, right? So here's Haliax and those and the Chandrian. What are they doing? They're trying to destroy the world. But how is that not make them the enemy? How does that make any sense whatsoever? Because here's the thing. We are not told. We are not told where these events from this story from millions of years ago, or millions, thousands of years ago, took place. We don't know where they were, right? But I suggest they were in the Fae, right? When he talks about destroying the world, he meant that world where they were, the Fae. It's broken. It has, problems, right? So the creatures that live there end up being twisted, mentally speaking, right? Voth is there for a couple of years, and he comes back and his brain just isn't the same, right? It changes people. There's a whatever the reason is, right? It's like in the story of Jax, like, it's the house that wasn't unfolded properly, right? So whoever created it, they didn't know exactly what they were doing, or they were a little bit off or a little bit wrong, and there was a problem with the Fae, right? It was broken somehow. And so that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to destroy the Fae because it has to be done, right? It's not a good thing. It's not a happy thing, but it has to be done. That's the thing. That's really like the central. It's not deception, but it's like the thing of all the little tidbits of information. Like, where are these events taking place? That particular conversation took place in the Fae. I suggest that also on top of just the fact that it's something worth considering anyway. You have the fact that Celitos says, "I can't kill you, but I can send you from this place." And especially if he's talking about destroying the Fae, what better way to save it than kick him out? Like, keep him as far away from it as you can, right? That would make sense. He says, I can send you from this place, and, where is Celitos? Where is Haliax? He's in the mortal world. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that he couldn't have crossed, back and forth 10 times in the time since, in 5,000 years. I don't believe that that's the case. I mean, for my own belief is that Haliax has never been back. So part of the question I got to say is the names. We have several different names for several different characters. established from the very beginning with Quoth, who has, more names than anyone should have, or more than anyone. He's got a ton of names, right? So matching up these names from different stories to know, what name is somebody going by in a particular story is going to be something like part of the effort we need to go to, right? So Haliax and the Chandrian, like those who follow him, the Chandrian are trying to accomplish that goal because it's necessary to destroy the Fae. So that's the motivation, right? That's what they're doing, and that's where I think that what Quoth's, where his motivations are hidden from himself, right? He is, in fact, it's one of those things. I'm so used to thinking about this without, I don't question it anymore. We are dealing with creatures of the Fae, some of whom look like humans, some of whom are in the mortal realm. And if we go back to that story, what really happened, where this all started, back with Aleph and the angels, right? So Aleph created the angels, said, I'm gonna, he gave them wings so they could go where they wished, right? Meaning that they're able to travel back and forth somehow special, or that they may go where they wish. I don't know how to interpret that exactly, but I associate that with being able to go between the mortal and Fae realms as they wanted to, or the rules are just different for them. It helps them in some way. I don't know what it is. In any case, what's the next thing? What happens to them after that, right? We have a story from Trappist that said, okay, 400 years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago, Menda was born, who was Telu. It was Telu being reborn. He got a new name, and then he had, his adventures in that life. And he said, I will come back. If you need me, and if I'm called in the proper way, I will come back. So he's being reborn, right? So you have Telu being reborn. Then we have the same thing that happened to Telu happened to 8 other people. So you have Telu and the angels, who are all being reborn with new names every single time, right? And the descriptions that we have of Telu and the angels are limited, but in the retrospect now, it seems obvious to me, but just because I've been thinking about it like this for so long. We have Telu most obvious, we have most information about Telu, right? He's mentioned the most times, but the story Scarpy tells didn't really actually describe him the way that it described the other people. He said he holds justice foremost in his heart, but that was pretty much, that was it. It wasn't a description of him. How would we recognize him? After the story's done being told, the innkeeper says something about how Scarpy started telling crazy stories, but everyone knows how God's displeasure falls on those who raise their hands to madmen. Right? To them, Telu is God, right? So Telu is a protector of the mad, the crazy, right? Who do we know that's like that? I mean, Elodin, okay? So, Elodin, maybe unbeknownst to himself, maybe he knows it by this point, is Telu. He's not God. He's just, originally, he came from the Fae. He's not a human creature, right? He came from the Fae. Now, they were all originally, from one, humans and Fae used to be the same, right? So, this is not, complete alien. He's not completely alien, right? He looks and acts human. I don't know, forget that. Doesn't matter. The point being, what other descriptions do we have? There are several that I'm sure of, some of which I'm not, there are some of that I'm not sure of. But Quoth is Andon, right? Andon, whose face was a mask with burning eyes. And this imagery surrounds him a lot over the course of 2 books, right? So Vachette says even when he makes his face a mask, his eyes still burn something. I forget what she says, but it's it's almost the same sort of description, or it was something similar. In any case, it was when I started looking for it, it was easy to find. then there was also the point where he was arguing with Denna, right? Denna played him her song about Lanray, and Lanray was the hero and misunderstood, and he got mad about that. He's like, I opened my mouth to yell at her, and it was like cracking open the door of a furnace, right? And it's like that seemed the same, right? Very similar. There's definitely other places where they talk about him making his face a mask, or his eyes. There's something going on there, right? Also, his name meant anger, and he has that whole conversation with Pentha about how he has such a fine anger and blah blah blah. Now, what is the definition we're going to use? Like, how was anger translated? I don't think it means something different to them that we have to kind of wrestle with, right? So, but Quoth is Andon, and here he is being reborn over and over again, and he's got this mission. He gets born and he grows up, and he doesn't remember, right? He doesn't remember all the stuff from these past lives, or at least not yet, at least not that we know of. I believe either he's remembered and he actually can remember these things, which I think is far more likely, or quite possibly he's just figured it out, right? At some point, though, he knows what he's got to do, and that's the thing where it started making more sense this time around, because in that conversation with Gran, right, he talks about normal people don't have it in them to do the things that I do, and it's upsetting, right? It takes something from him. He's really messed up by it. So I think part of what's going on is he's growing in a way that he's becoming the healer that he wants to be, even though being a healer is a really painful job at points, right? You got to do like hard, difficult things. He's got to develop himself in such a way that he can do what needs to be done, and that's kind of the story of Lanray, right? Lanray he was so driven to do what he was trying to do, right? I think we've misunderstood his intentions at least a little bit. I'm not quite sure what to say about that yet, but Lanray, he was willing to do what needed to be done at great cost, right? He's hated almost universally. He can't sleep, can't go crazy, can't die. Like he's hating life, but his mission, like what he's aiming to do, what he's trying to do, is so important that it's just what has to be done, right? He's got it. He did what he had to do to do what needed to be done. He did what he had to do the right thing. And that's it. Like, that's the thing. Like, we have a different enemy, and it's confused. It's a very confused story. Like, that is a very good way to put it. Like, who is the actual enemy? Is there an actual enemy? If there is an actual enemy, which I'm sure that there is, right? Like, the question to me actually starts off with, who is the enemy? Because, to every person, they're the hero. Each person is the hero of their own story. So when I tell my story, I'm going to be the hero. And the same story, the same story told from two different perspectives is going to have two different slants on who was the good guy. Part of the lesson is, just because you got a story doesn't mean you got all the stories. And secondly, they're like I don't know, there's something about like the real bad guy. Like, if there's a real bad guy, like the real center of everything is, I believe, the Cathay, who I believe to be Celatos, right? Like, there's something going on there. He was driven crazy. Like, he was trying to protect his city, and it got destroyed, and it meant like all this stuff to him. So now he's just completely on the warpath. He's going to kill who he has to kill to make things, to get revenge or something. right? I think someone else will have to look into his motivations more if I can. But it doesn't matter. Point being, that's the goal, right? The goal the ultimate goal is to destroy the Fae. And if that's the ultimate goal, I kind of wonder, like, there's part of me, wonders about the creation of the Fae. Because here's my best guess about what'll happen as a result is I think that the Fae wasn't just created from nothing, right? They said he sewed it out of whole cloth. Whoever was that created the Fae sewed it out of whole cloth, which can mean completely fabricated or completely made from nothing or something. I think that's kind of how I'm used to that particular turn of phrase, sewn from whole cloth. Like you made something up. It was a lie. Like you invented it completely. That's kind of what I associate that with. So it could mean that, but sewn from whole cloth, I would suggest, probably has a more literal interpretation that's more correct. But the important part, the part that I wonder about is, was the creation of the Fae a creation of something new, or did the creation of the Fae involve taking the one world that existed and cutting it in half, right? And I think about it in a sort of like a left brain, right brain sort of way, right? Like one side was the more logical, mathematical, chemistry side. That was the mortal realm. And then you had the other side that was the more dreamy, intuitive world, was the Fae, right? Was this a split into two halves that had, like each having part of what the original was?
To Pennsylvania.
Because if that's the case, then I could definitely see, like, if you destroy the Fae, it could go either way. Like, it could be like, okay, now we've cut off the magical part of us that was hurting us, and now, like, that's the origin of the modern world where magic doesn't exist. Maybe that's what happens. Also, maybe they eliminate the Fae. Like, they can't cut it off necessarily. Maybe it's just about collapsing the two back together again. Maybe it brings about that unified world that would be, there would be more magic in the mortal world than there was before. Maybe. I can see that happening. I don't know. In any case, those are my insights for the moment. It's very, just off the top of my head as I'm driving, paying more attention to driving than to what I'm saying. I hope I have I hope that maybe doing it that way turned out better than it would have if I had been paying attention. But in any case, thank you for watching, even though it's terrible. You're looking at my nose, basically. So, see you around.